Good morning, everyone. Once again, welcome to Deductive and Inductive Reasoning Introduction to Logic. We are now at our 8th week, and for week 8, our topic is proposition again. So it's just a continuation, but we will be focusing on quality and quantity. So for this week, we will differentiate quality from quantity and also identify singular and particular and universal propositions. So let's proceed to our discussion. So we have here the quantity or extension of proposition. So uh, let's first discuss the quality. So again, the copula is the qualifier of the proposition. Because of it, the proposition is either affirmative or negative. So the following are considered affirmative but equivalently negative statements. He is not a college graduate is ineligible. He who is not. So some animals are non-mammals. So we have here again, the copula is our linking verb. So let's go back to our week 7 discussion. We have the subject, the copula, and the predicate. So once again, the copula is the qualifier of the proposition. So it determines the quality of the preposition. So it's very important that we have this copula or the linking verb. So because of the copula, once again, it um, it either determines whether the proposition is affirmative or negative. So we have here from the first sentence that we have, um, he who is not a college graduate is ineligible. So these are considered affirmative but equivalently negative statements. Some animals are non-mammals. So from the two sentences, we have the copula in the first sentence is, and the copula in the second sentence is are. So is the subject for the first sentence is he, and then the subject for the second sentence is animals or some animals as well. And the predicate for our first subject is ineligible. And also our predicate on our second sentence is non-mammals. So for this basically, if you want to know the quality of the proposition, you are going to use the subject, predicate, and the copula for determining the quality of the proposition. So now let's discuss the quantity of or extension of proposition. So the quantity or extension of the proposition is determined by the quantity or extension of the subject term. So looking back to our lesson for week 4, so we have here the different kinds of term. Once again, we have the singular, particular, and universal. So if you would go back to our lessons or PDF files, so once again, singular is a proposition and is particular if its subject term is standing for an indeterminately designated portion of its absolute extension. For particular, a proposition is singular if its subject term is standing for one um, designated portion of its absolute extension. And so you could see the difference. So for particular, indeterminately, and for singular, one definitely designated portion. And for universal, once again, proposition is universal if its subject term is standing for each of the subject that it can be applied. So basically, once again, for singular, particular, universal, we have some signs again that we could use to determine whether the term or proposition is singular, particular, and universal. So for this one, if the subject term is indeterminate, that if it's not modified by any sign of singularity, this, that, etc., and so many more, particularity, so signs of particularity, again, some, a portion of, etc., and then or universality. For universality, we have all, every, each, and so many more. So basically for this one, the proposition is indeterminate. By its sense, the quantity of the proposition can be determined. In case of doubt, also, assume that it is particular and thus avoid attempting to draw more out of the premises that may actually be in them. So we have here some examples for singular again. So Shakespeare is England's greatest dramatist. Second sentence is Fido is parking outside my window. So the signs of singularity here is the name of the person. So we could see Shakespeare and Fido. So that's why it is a singular term or a singular proposition. So second example for particular, we have two sentences. So we have here, some student is shouting at the top of his voice. Second sentence we have is, our neighbor's dog is barking outside my window. So we have seen here some signs of particularity. So we have some student and also our neighbor's dog. So for the first sentence, we have the signs of particularity. So we have modifiers like some, a portion of. So basically those are signs of particularity. And also remember, if it is a particular term or particular proposition, so it may define to a specific thing, such as this, our neighbor's dog is barking outside my window. So basically, whose dog is barking outside your window? So it's your, or it's our neighbor's dog. So let's go on to universal. So we have here for universal, we have two examples, sentences. We have here, love is many splendor thing. And second example is, many men are suffering from arthritis. So we could see that if a term or proposition is universal, if it is basically a fact, and also if it's using some modifiers such as all, every, each, many, and so many more. So from the first sentence, as love is many splendor things. So basically it is a fact. And for the second sentence, many men are suffering from arthritis. So we have seen here the signs or modifier many. So meaning it is a universal term or a proposition. So we have here the symbols a, e, o, and o on the basis of both quality and quantity. So attributive propositions are designed as a, e, and o. So these letters are from the Latin words affirmo. So what does affirmo mean? It means I affirm, and nego, which means deny. So A, E, I, and O have the following meaning. So take note of this. A and I, it means the first two vowels of affirmo. So it signify affirmative propositions, and it is either a universal or singular. And I is particular. So basically, A is either universal or singular, and I is just particular. Meanwhile, if we are going to E and O, the vowels of nego, it signifies negative proposition. So E, either a universal or singular, and O for particular. So let's take a look of our example. So all voters are citizens. So basically these are all uh, a proposition. So a propositions again are universal and singular, Every voter is a citizen. A dog is an animal. So how about the E proposition? So if we are talking about the E proposition, it is either again universal or singular. So E proposition negative is signifies negative proposition. So no dog is cat. Dogs are not cats. I am not a lawyer. So A signifies for a affirmative proposition and E signifies for negative proposition. But the difference is A and E is for singular and universal only. How about if we're going to O and I? So for O and I, this only applies to particular term or proposition. And again, I is for affirmative sentences or proposition, and O is for negative proposition. So we have here I again. Some houses are white. Many men are selfish and dogs are pests. Meanwhile, for O proposition, we have some cat is not black. All horses can't jump, and not every man is a saint. So, to determine the quantity of the predicate, we have some rules. So, rule number one, the predicate is singular if it stands for one individual or group, and likewise designates this individual or group definitely. So, example, John is not the tallest boy in the room. And another example, he is not the first to do that. So basically, for this one, the predicate is singular. We could see that. So another rule for predicate. So once again, these are part of the sentences. So for the parts of sentences, we have the subject, copula, and predicate. And now we are talking about the quantity of the predicate. So rule number two, rule on affirmative proposition. Once again, we have for affirmative, we have A and I. So the predicate of an affirmative proposition is particular or undistributed. So meaning unless it is singular. So example number one, Gabriel Marcel is a French philosopher, and a spear is a solid. So for this sentences, these are all affirmative proposition because the predicate is a particular or undistributed. For rule number three, we have for the negative proposition, the predicate of a negative proposition is universal or distributed unless it is singular. So basically for this one, we have two examples again. Some men are not artists and some men are not aviators. So we could see that the two sentences here are signifying negative propositions, and the predicate of a negative proposition is universal or distributed as well. Not artists and aviators. Artists are universal, it applies to all, and aviators applies to all as well. So for, for this lesson, we have some references and suggested readings. So it's in your handouts and PDF files. Kindly refer to it. And I will show you a video discussion regarding about week 8 as well.
Discuss the quantity of a categorical proposition. In terms of quantity, a categorical proposition can be classified into two, namely particular and universal. A particular proposition is one that contains a particular subject term. Example: some Asians are excellent basketball players. A universal proposition is one that contains a universal subject term. Example, all men are mortal. As we can see, it is the quantity of the subject that determines the quantity of the proposition. Thus, if the subject is particular, then the proposition is particular. And if the subject is universal, then the proposition is universal. Now, if the subject of the proposition does not contain a signifier, then the quantity of the proposition must be based on what the proposition denotes. Consider this example. Nuns are girls. As we can see, the subject of the proposition does not contain a signifier. But if we analyze it, it would become clear that the
I'm here in the biggest trading floor located in the heart of BGC Taguig. One thing I've learned as a currency trader, pwede tayong kumita ng pera sa Forex no matter the status of our economy. Whether the market is up or down, you can earn money. Hindi katulad ng stock.
Proposition is universal. This is because there is not at least one nun that is not a girl. In other words, all nuns are girls. Let's consider another example. Americans are rich. Obviously, this example denotes particularity because it's not sound to assume that all Americans are rich. Of course, many Americans are rich, but reason tells us that not all of the Americans are rich. Hence, this proposition can be translated as follows. Some Americans are rich. Now, let's talk about the quality of a categorical proposition. Categorical propositions can be either affirmative or negative. On the one hand, a proposition is affirmative if the copula of the proposition does not contain a negation sign not. Example, some students are brilliant. On the other hand, a proposition is negative if the copula of the proposition contains a negation sign not. Example, some students are not brilliant. Now, if we combine the quantity and quality of propositions, the result is the four types of categorical propositions, namely, universal affirmative, universal negative, particular affirmative, and particular negative. Logicians use the letter A to represent a universal affirmative proposition, E for universal negative, I for particular affirmative, and O for particular negative. Consider these examples. Universal affirmative A. All men are mortal. Universal negative E. No men are mortal. Particular affirmative I. Some men are mortal. Particular negative O. Some men are not mortal. Now, let's talk about the distribution of terms. In a universal proposition, the subject term is distributed, while in a particular proposition, the subject term is undistributed. And in a negative proposition, the predicate term is distributed, while in an affirmative proposition, the predicate term remains undistributed. In other words, the subject terms of all universal propositions are always universal, while the subject terms of all particular propositions are always particular. And the predicate terms of all affirmative propositions are always particular, while the predicate terms of all negative propositions are always universal. Lastly, to avoid confusion when we analyze the 8 rules of syllogisms, it is helpful to translate categorical propositions into their standard form. Here are the standard forms of an A, E, I, and O propositions. A proposition: all plus subject plus copula plus predicate. E proposition: no plus subject plus copula plus predicate. I proposition: some plus subject plus copula plus predicate. And O proposition: some plus subject plus copula plus not plus predicate. Now, let me give you some examples. A proposition: every priest is religious. Standard form: all priests are religious. E proposition: every priest is not religious. Standard form: no priest is religious. I proposition: almost all politicians are corrupt. Standard form: some politicians are corrupt. O propositions: several politicians are not corrupt. Standard form: some politicians are not corrupt. That's all there is to it for now for the discussion on the nature and dynamics of terms and propositions in categorical logic.
So this, I hope you have learned something from the video that I have shown you. So basically, that was a good discussion about the quality and quantity of proposition. Now let's go back to our lesson. So in your handouts, we have two activities. We have activity 1 and activity 2. And I am requiring you to answer both activities. So for activity 1, classify the following propositions as A, E, I, or O. And for the second activity, just answer that, and total of 10 items for each activity. So once again, if you don't have any questions, let's proceed to this ending of discussion. And again, for activities, we have two activity requirements. We have activity 1 and activity 2, so total of 20 items. And then if you have any questions regarding about week 8 activity, don't hesitate to ask me. You may directly ask me through Facebook Messenger, or also directly ask me at school. So again, for this week's topic, we have differentiate the quality and quantity of propositions, and also discuss the um, uh, quantity of propositions with regards to negative and affirmative propositions, that signifies those negative and positive propositions through A, E, I, and O signifiers. So if you don't have any questions, I would like to say thank you to everyone, and share Bible verse from the book of Mark, chapter 9, verse 23. So said Jesus, everything is possible for one who believes. So just keep on believing and have faith. God will provide for all of your needs, and for all of your wants as well. Just ask and believe in Him, and nothing is impossible through Him. So thank you once again, everyone, and God bless.